Welcome, everybody. We began. Welcome to Health AI Public-Private Partnership Use Cases. And this is a topic where we've actually did a webinar on this 2 weeks ago, which was very top line, best practices, principles, advice. And we do webinars in two on this series. And in this event, we are diving into use cases where we're going to illustrate best practices with instructive examples. And I'm bringing on our first speaker in about 30 seconds. And this webinar will run for 1 hour's time. When that hour ends, we continue. We say goodbye to YouTube. It doesn't, the replay will only be the actual webinar itself. From the second hour, we'll be doing an after party. We'll be bringing on members of the audience, either on camera or on microphone, to share their use cases and to chat to the panel. So, without any further ado, I am going to bring on our first speaker, Rachel.
Hello.
Welcome. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak.
Thanks for having me here.
And Rachel wears many hats and has worn many hats. I think most notably, and how I came to meet you is for your work for Open EHR and Open Standards. And you had a lot to say about playing a leading role in industry conversations and knocking on doors and creating partnerships with standard bodies and people innovating with open standards. So I thought, who better to open this event with than you? And I wonder if you could, that was a clumsy introduction, I know. I wonder if you could introduce yourself, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So I describe myself as formerly a recovering health systems CIO. So as CIO and professor, I led digital health education for all of the NHS as well. Became policymaker, so led AI policy for the UK government for healthcare. And in the last 2 and a bit years, I've been doing global open standards, plus a lot of not-for-profit and some small company roles. So yeah, keep busy.
Okay. So I like to start every event with the why. Why is this conversation important? Why should startups understand or learn to understand the importance of partnering with the public sector? Why should they care?
Okay, so public-private partnerships are essential for any health system to progress. It's just the top and bottom of it. And startups have got so much to bring to health systems in terms of expertise. There's almost a two-way learning between health systems and SMEs. And if you get that partnership right, you both thrive. And in my experience, I used to run what we call the digital factories in Manchester, which were our innovation hubs with small companies, some of them AI-based, some of them not. But the point there was to understand the companies, what they needed, to understand the health system and what you needed, and to work together. So what there is a market and a need. There is, a set of problems that need solving, which are really human problems, really feel good to actually solve them. And, I think it's about the gearing. So small companies can attract different people, can operate differently to big health systems. I, as a CIO, couldn't have a big bench of different AI talent or different programming talent. Actually working with these companies to innovate meant that I could do things that I couldn't do internally. So it was kind of a win-win with those companies that we work with really well.
Can you share an example of a public-private partnership and kind of unpack how it ticks?
Okay, so I did some really big ones, like with Hitachi and things like that, but I'm going to focus on a really small one. And this is where I end up both sides of the fence, okay? So I'm a CIO and I get approached by a company that does algorithms for routing. And it's actually for gritting lorries for the snow, right? really small startup, and they're doing it really effectively for that. And they come in and they say to me, we can route nurses using this algorithm and make it a lot more effective. And, I had the digital factory and I really liked what they did. I really liked how they worked. So I said, okay, come and work with us in the digital factory. Fast forward a number of months, they ask if I can go on the board on behalf of the health system. I go on the board. And we actually, right across the region use this for all of our community nursing. We're getting 20% more productivity out of nursing, higher nursing satisfaction, because we're starting the nurses near home, ending them near home, giving them cases that are appropriate to their skills because it's smart matching. And next thing, they've sold it to all of Wales, the country, and then it moves on and on. The thing there for me, the secret sauce was for us to communicate really well what our needs were, how we were set up. So my questions to them are, what's your business model? What's your cash flow? How do you need to be paid? What works for you in terms of how we structure the contract? They were great. They were really curious. They're like, put us on the ground with nurses, show us what's happening on the ground, show us what's going wrong, let us do, shadowing. And it was this curiosity from both sides about what we needed to make this work. And it was giving, as I said, 20% productivity in nursing and higher satisfaction. For me, it was also about, that kind of me actually playing with them, in this case on the board, but in other cases with companies we work with, it was about us vesting our time and expertise into those companies so they could give us their best solutions. That company sold. I got a bit of money out of it for the, the health system. And it was just an absolutely awesome journey. But that for me was kind of like a really good way of saying, we're the big entity, you're the small entity, you can move fast, you've got the expertise, but we've got the big problems and we've got the understanding of the health system. How do we bring that together to make solutions? And the other really nice thing I'll say about this is that company then generated jobs in our region, which itself is a public health intervention, because more jobs in education equals better health for the population. So actually incubating local companies for me was a real joy.
That sounds really powerful with the getting them involved with the business model. And I know a lot of startups struggle and they kind of leave that off to the side and they struggle with it later.
Yeah.
And,
I think one thing for me is, as a CIO, it's really great if small companies can say, this is the best way of partnering with us, or this is the way that would be a good way to partner with us. I think if you've already done some of that thinking, or maybe 3 ways that you can partner with us, I think that really helps.
and Ruben, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so I had a question on that, Rachel. I think it is absolutely very, I will be giving some example of some of the cases we had done at SenzMate also. What is like, how long is this process normally to get some of these, because that's where everybody gets stuck. But that is rightfully, I mean, in the US, FDA and various agencies, we struggle there too. So my question is, for the audience, what kind of process, how long it takes normally, kind of thing.
So if you're getting CE marked, as it is in Europe, which is the equivalent of FDA approval, it will typically take, depending on what level you are, around about 6 months. I've been through that process a few times. The last one I did cost probably just under $100,000 in terms of US money, right? And that was not the highest class device. So you have to have that on your critical path, right? Because you've got to get through the legislative hoops. Sadly, the UK is now doing its own process in Europe and other ones. So you've got, say you wanted to do Europe, US, and the UK, eventually you're going to have to do 3 processes. But yeah, it's something that needs to be on the critical path in terms of actually getting those approvals. And sometimes there can be bottlenecks from the regulators. So it's kind of something you've always got to have your eye on from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things which we have seen in US working is there's called breakthrough technology or some in the device approval process with the FDA. And like, I'll speak of that later. One of the project SenzMate worked on it, helped develop that technology behind it, and then they got the approval. Because of that, they are able to go and get some of the big companies sign up for their product. Yeah, so this is again is a cumbersome work, but it in the the results is pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a kite mark, isn't it? It's quality mark, which is totally worth it, because that really helps small companies to get the attention, as you said.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Richard, please don't go away. I'm taking you off screen and I'm bringing you back. And our Shereese, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And you know, when I first met you, it was actually in a webinar after party, and you said something that really stuck with me. Founder, know thyself and understand your why. And I'm going to be posting that clip again later. I wonder if you could just almost like a sequel clip. How do startups leverage their why in how they communicate with the public sector?
So I think it's important, first of all, to understand that they need to be clear on their why, because what I find is that a lot of startups confuse their what with their why. So the what is the technology, right? The why is the outcome or the transformation that it's supposed to do for the public. And I feel like if you aren't clear on what those two things are, it's very difficult to partner with the public sector with your idea. So when you are trying to form these partnerships, that whole situation, as I call it, has to work on trust, integrity, and impact, all three of those things. So when you're working with the public, it is easier if you're clear on your why, not the what, the why, to get the public to buy in. The public does not trust healthcare, the healthcare system, particularly in the US. Naturally, it requires us to build relationships, and you can't do that properly if you don't know why you're there. So I always say it's better to have that conversation with yourself as a startup. Start with your why. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why should someone else want to buy it? Why would someone engage with us? And if you can get through that why equation, you have a stronger foundation to partner with the public. And the public will understand better if they understand your why and if your mission aligns with theirs. And that's probably the best conversation you can have if you're starting off trying to build something.
You have an instructional use case you can share with the audience, Shereese.
I will share, let's see. I'm thinking about, I have a client who's actually currently expanding into Oman, and they have an AI care coordinating tool. And right now we are doing that kind of testing the market, testing the waters. So one of the things we had to do, because they are founded in the United States, is to develop a relationship with Oman. And one of the things I strongly suggested was not that we just try to break into the market with my normal strategy for going into a new market. I said, let's get our feet wet and get to know that market first before we go in there and say, hey, we've got this cool tool you guys need to be using, because as we know, all environments are not built the same. And so what we did was we partnered not with a public health entity there first. We partnered with the Omani Business Council to actually have them bring all different entities from the healthcare sector that's already there. We started meeting with them individually and explained to them our why. This is why we're doing this. This is why we feel like you need this in Oman. And that allowed those partners who were just partners in terms of the getting to know phase, but it allowed them to carry our message to other people in the region. So it was a softer landing for us to get in. So once we decided to actually launch there, it was more an invitation instead of us having to just, go in there and beg for a seat at the table. So it was very, my clients they said, this is kind of, I'm trying to remember the words, how he put it. He was like, this is kind of badass. He had that kind of thing. He's like, how do you know these people? I said, I don't. I took my time to figure out what they needed. I studied from top to bottom. The Oman, they have a 2040 plan for healthcare. I'm sorry, that includes healthcare. So I studied it back to front. And I got to know what their needs are in the region. And that's when I went into the business council and said, here's from their 2040 plan, here's what we're looking to offer the region and how it can benefit the region as a whole. And those two, it was the Omani Business Council, and also they have one other healthcare organization we're partnering with. Those are the two entities I went to start those partnerships. So once we were clear and they were clear on our why, it was like, they have to know that you're coming in peace, right? So once we were able to do that, it was easier to kind of get them to look at what we were doing as something that they should invite, and which they end up doing. They were like, please come and do this. And it's just been a really good partnership so far. I'm going to be there in early December at their invite. So it's a partnership that already has, meat to it. We're already developing a relationship with them. So I think it's going to work out well, but that could not have happened if we weren't clear on our why and the why that they would buy into before we actually went there. So I always say the why is very important. And I hate to say why over and over again, but it is so very important, because I noticed that some startups even die in the pilot phase because they weren't clear on that, right? They know what they're doing, they know what they're building, but they don't know why they're building it or why anybody should take an interest in it. And it causes issues for them down the line. But I find that if you're clear on that, it keeps you from making a lot of mistakes, because it's like, we're clear on why we're here. The other thing it does is keeps that trust factor, that authentic nature of your product or your service right there up front for everybody to see. We told you this is why we're here and this is all we're doing. So it helps with the trust equation.
Yeah, so you are muted, Jose, but let me jump in quickly onto that conversation. I think 2 points which resonated well with me on what you said there. The first one is, you walked, many of the people in our audience are trying to build a company, try to build a product and all that. And the other side of it is winning customers, or mindset of the stakeholders are the challenging part, where you went through a consulting 101 kind of thing. Yes, make sure you can articulate the value and convince them why are you the best partner, rather than just saying, I have the best technology, I have the best product, I have the best thing, I have the best. Who cares? I mean, does it solve my problem? Yeah.
Exactly. I say, I tell people this all the time. I said, if you want people to be brutally honest with you, people do not care what you just built. They 100%, you can say it till the cows come home. They care how what you built solves a problem for them. So if you're not getting into that conversation, they're already gone, and you're going to stumble a little bit. Don't sit here and tell me what you built. Tell me how what you built is solving my problem. And a lot of people miss that mark. Because they want to just tell.
Yeah, go ahead, Jose.
There's something I wanted to follow up with when you mentioned the public sector partner were sharing the story internally.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you could speak to that. How do you communicate in such a way that the people receiving that message, feel encouraged, and it's easy for them to pass that story on? So I know a lot of people, they'll present their value proposition and the other people will be like, oh, okay, that sounds great. But then they're like, when they have to kind of communicate it themselves to other people, they struggle. What advice would you have to people to communicate in such a way that it's easy to pass on?
Yeah, so the most basic thing takes us back to, early years of college, like do your research. One of the things I always ask startups, it's like this ideal client that you're trying to reach, this deal organization you want to work with, have you read up on them? Are you clear on their why? Right. So for me, that was very important. And I always ask startups that I work with, I'm like, are you clear on why this person should want to work with you? Right. So that's the only time you're going to have that opportunity to tie into what they're trying to get done so they carry your message. Excuse me. When I work with someone, when I go into a different segment or into a market, I know that market A, B, C, and D, learn the language, I do the whole thing. So before I even get there, I know what they're looking for and I tailor what I'm doing to what they're looking for. So it's easier for them to go back to their bosses and say, hey, this is really hitting on what we've been looking for here. We really need to take a look at this. And then they carry that out. You want the person that you're kind of pitching to or kind of partnering with to take your message, right, to another 10 people so that you're in the room. Don't get fixated on, I just have to tell them about what I do. That's all I have to do. I have to make sure they understand what I do. No, tie into what they're looking for. If their issue is rural health and getting maternal health for women in those rural areas, make sure your solution answers that in some kind of way and make sure you make a point about it, intentional, when you meet with them. Say, hey, these are the areas we're looking in. We have this great thing that we think we can have doulas to, like that's because that's one of the things we're doing in Oman, how doulas can use our technology to work with moms that are, it's hard for them to get clinic appointments and that type of thing. And that really resonated with them. Like, yeah, we do have that particular issue, but I knew that before I got there. And so often where startups stumble is that because they're too busy trying to get what they're building into the mouths of people. And it's like, people don't talk about you because you built something. People can talk about you because you did something for them. So it's like, make sure the problem that they're having, if you're solving it, let them know that right up front, because that's the message they take back. And I tell everybody, you have 20 seconds to deliver that message. You can talk for 10 minutes to an hour, but the first 20 seconds, if you're not answering the questions they're looking for, you're already out of the game.
No, I think it's a great way of articulating that vision from what we are trying to do, but that has to be embedded. But I think the starting point, there was a comment on the chat block about the storytelling. Yes, absolutely. Storytelling is the most important part, but storytelling with facts, with data, with relevancy for these people. What Shereese is talking about is the most important thing. And if you don't tell the story in a way which connects with the audience, connects with the people, what they do, they will start looking at their smartphones. They will start looking at everything else, and then they ask random questions, and then they will never follow up with it. Yeah.
Yeah, storytelling and narrative. It's not a big focus of this event. It might be an idea for a future event to have an entirely dedicated to it. And thank you, Vishay, for adding that question. Now, Erkeda, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And Erkeda comes from a clinical background, and you speak a lot about de-risking, risk proofing, maybe not digital health solutions in healthcare. I wonder if you can introduce yourself before I start asking you questions.
Sure.
I know Thank you.
So my name is Erkeda. I'm a physician by training, but I've been working in the digital health space for almost the past decade in varying levels of leadership. And one thing about working in digital health is we know that healthcare is a risky business, but providing innovations that kind of change the way that we envision and we look at the way that healthcare is delivered makes it even riskier. So I have a digital health risk management firm called Digital Risk Compliance Solutions, where we help organizations build safer digital health solutions. And as we're implementing AI, help to kind of simplify that risk and think about how we can make populations healthier while also not staying in that box and kind of thinking outside of the box when we're thinking about new solutions.
I wonder if you can take us continuous down this arc a bit and kind of look after that a first initial meeting. So they've got some a digital health startup has engagement with the public sector. How do they continue to build that relationship? What should they be expecting as they're progressing along that? And how should they be conducting themselves?
I think that's a great question, especially as we think about the viewpoint of the purpose of this session, where we know that public-private partnerships are instrumental for increasing responsible and safe and equitable innovation in this system. Like the private industry and startups, they have this technology, and we know that many public organizations are looking for these solutions because they're not going to go and reinvent the wheel. And we know that healthcare moves so slowly at an interesting pace because we have standards, we have metrics. It's not like going into even like the banking industry, like we're dealing with human lives. So we have to think about ways to partner where you can create this safer approach where regulatory bodies and healthcare systems in the industry can come together and collaborate with their different value that they bring in their expertise in order to have like safer, more transparent, better quality, and more ethical implementation. And like Rachel stated earlier in the webinar, like if you get that partnership right, you both can thrive. So it's more kind of like what Shereese was saying, where you have to make sure that your why is present and that you're able to give that value proposition as well as showcase, like, make sure you're a good fit, make sure you're a good match, and that it's mutual, like you're going towards the same goal. A lot of times in all organizations, whether or not they're private, they're public, they're startups, a lot of times you work in these silos. So in order to improve this population health, we have to think about, yes, checking those boxes to make sure that we're doing things in alignment with what's legal, what's safe, what outside of even that, like what is right. But also, how do we maintain that accountability and that oversight? And making sure, I think even as someone said in the comments, like they were validating these things. So like we were talking just now about relationships, and this is one of the most intimate relationships you'll have when you have these partnerships. Relationships are important, and it is built on trust. You have to think about the trust between the patient, who eventually will be the end user using the product, but also as you're building these relationships with the public and the private sector, how are you coming together? We know that a lot of times, a lot of startups, they will throw out a lot of things and a lot of promises, but you have to prove that it works. Like a lot of times when you're building these systems, you're thinking about the lowest hanging fruit or the V1 use case, and that's lovely when you're thinking about like the product development thing and how you're thinking about how to create a feature, but you also have to think about this as human lives. So you have to think about the scientific method and what is evidence-based and validated, and how can we marry those two and speak the same language so that we're working together to actually improve outcomes and not just have a lot of things. Because when you're creating these partnerships and these relationships, when you have these bigger entities with organizations like the Mayo Clinic partnering with K Health, and they're creating these nice things where they're implementing AI and taking some of the burden off of physicians and other clinicians, how do you make sure that when you're partnering with a specific vendor, you're not making false promises and ruining your reputation? So it's gonna impact the brand. So you have to make sure that you're doing appropriate research, you're having these conversations. That's why it takes so long, as Rachel mentioned, 6 to 18 months or so of making sure that you can practice what you preach. And then when you come together, you're thinking through these processes to have this well-designed partnership that is going to strengthen public trust, protect patients, but also accelerate how we're incorporating these new technologies. We're focused on AI right now, but in 5 years, it'll be something else. So how do we build systems to incorporate technology and oversee it and make sure that we're continuously looking for improvement and for ways in which there may be gaps for the next big thing?
Thank you. Erkeda. Sorry, Erkeda. You have a use case that's instructive that you can share.
Yeah, so when we're thinking about the way that we want to incorporate these public and private partnerships, I know you guys, if you're interested and you're here either watching live or you're going to be watching later, you've probably seen a lot of these, whether or not it's at the conferences or going, like even like sometimes I'll go to some of the AI forums that we have at Congress. Thinking through this is very important, and also learning from other organizations. So recently I spoke on kind of like a panel workshop type thing where I was with the WHO, and we were working with the Portuguese national government, where they have what they call local health units, or LHUs, where they're working in more rural areas to figure out how can we incorporate this technology, how can we incorporate this AI, and find different partners. So it was representatives from 5 different countries, and we kind of talked through like what works well, what doesn't, and how can we bring these innovations together while also having the appropriate things that we need. Like, of course, we need AI governance. Of course, there's things going on now in the news with the EU, and they've definitely been more progressive in terms of the oversight that is recommended as you're incorporating AI, and we'll see where that ends up. But we shouldn't just be doing this because it's a law. Like, we should be doing this because it's for patient safety and it's for patient health. So it definitely showcased when we were coming together with that your effort shouldn't be just technology alone. It shouldn't just be government oversight, but what is working and what can you take forward to this, and you can take it from the public to learn from. So a lot of times these organizations kind of work in huddles about what they think will work, but not necessarily figuring out how it works in the larger ecosystem. So what may work for your startup in a smaller, tinier population may not work to help expand things throughout an entire country or multiple rural areas. So working through co-design with partners that may not be able to provide everything is really good, and having that input from the public, the private, the leaders, as well as bringing clinicians on earlier in the process, very at the beginning, is very important, because a lot of times startups will bring the best minds together, and they'll build things, and they'll be like, oh, they're ex-Microsoft or they are ex-Facebook, and I'm just putting names in. That doesn't mean that you guys aren't lovely if you came from those organizations, but you bring all of these experts in and you create things kind of in a environment in which is not real life. So you need these people to come in and say, oh yeah, that'd be wonderful if we could do it, but did you think about like how clinicians need to be licensed in every state? Or did you think about how patients aren't going to upload their blood thing to their Oura Ring or something like that? So it's very important to have that extra insight from day one.
Thank you. And I'm going to bring you back in a few minutes. I'm going to bring on the final speaker. Thank you so much. And Eric.
Jose, how are you?
Very good. And thanks for agreeing to speak. And you got one of the most difficult spots on the panel. And I want to talk about, oh, by the way, actually, Eric, maybe you can introduce yourself. I know you've worn many hats. I'm going to do a terrible job if I do it myself.
No, you do fine. No, I really appreciate it. Again, I'm Eric Doherty. I'm president and CEO of DPE International, and basically our group is a project management consulting firm. So we do a lot of work in the AI space, a lot of work in the healthcare space, working with medical device companies, pharmaceutical companies, health networks, hospital systems, a lot of digital health as well. You know, really working from a project management standpoint, looking at everything from go-to-market strategy, people change, and some of the nuances that are needed as far as the infrastructure for different groups and different companies that are either in the startup mode or in the growth mode. And then also looking at, I guess, really from a platform standpoint, what types of platforms can be beneficial to an organization, be it an AI platform or a digital type of platform that could basically look at efficiencies in either their human resources area, their manufacturing area, their people area, et cetera. So pretty multifaceted, and it's been a lot of fun, especially working in the AI space and obviously in the healthcare and digital space as well.
What if you could take us to the next step in the arc? So past the introductions, past the beginning to work together, where do these kinds of partnerships encounter difficulty? Because I imagine it's not that we've talked about it, it's a long road, and I imagine it's not always smooth. What advice do you give to, like, what to look out for? Where do these partnerships go off the rails? And what advice do you have to startups if they're having trouble with this partnership? They're like, they could be 6 months, 9 months into it. How do they put it right when they hit a bump in the road?
Yeah, public-private partnerships can be really, truly some of the most powerful engines for societal impact, and especially in healthcare, technology and really infrastructure. And really, too often they do go off the rails, but it's not really because of bad actors. It's because of misaligned expectations and different definitions of really what success is for each entity. In the public sector, leaders, again, CEOs, C-suite folks, are guided by really main purposes of accountability, transparency, and long-term social benefit. Whereas in the private sector, especially among startups, the focus is really on speed, ROI, return on investment, and competitive differentiation. And when those operating philosophies collide, without a clear bridge between the both of them, even the most promising partnerships can really start to fray, which is unfortunate. And it really boils down to three areas. It's misaligned incentives, it's pace and governance gaps, and communication breakdowns. And the misaligned incentives, public agencies measure success in community outcomes and regulatory compliance, whereas startups measure success in adoption curves and investment returns. And really, I think the key to, starting any type of partnership, and again, I'm really big on strategic partnerships and kind of building those relationships, really taking the time up front to build and share kind of a preferential scorecard amongst the group, and really kind of figuring out, what works, what doesn't for each side, and then come up with a game plan. Really one that defines mutual KPIs, timelines, and metrics of what that success actually will look like, and make sure both sides understand really what good looks like. And I think when they have that type of appreciation between the two, I think in kind of not only the short term, but also the long term, that relationship will benefit and prosper, which is great. Under the pace and governance gaps, governments move by quarters and committees, and sometimes, unfortunately, not only just quarters, maybe 6 months to a year or plus. And really where startups, though, unfortunately, are on the opposite side of it, where they move by really sprints and scrums. And the result can be kind of frustrating, really, to both entities, because the startup side is trying to push things forward, and the government side is saying, hey, wait, we've got to go through this motion or that motion to get things approved within the organization. And so it really can be frustrating on both sides. So again, I think from our standpoint, being in that kind of startup and modality and I guess kind of growth factor organizations that we work with, we try to really help them understand there needs to be a structured cadence, on a regular basis, have some type of communication that goes on between both sides of the groups, quarterly governance, maybe monthly governance, where you have reviews and transparent communication channels built. When possible, establish an internal translator, somebody that maybe is on each side of the team, the private side, public side, where they are the ones that kind of coordinate and communicate amongst themselves, and then drive some of the communication processes forward. And the last one is really the communication breakdowns. A lot of times these strategic partnerships, these public-private relationships, they don't implode overnight. This is something that's been going on for quite some time, and then it just gets to a boiling point where boom, everything kind of falls off the rails. You don't want to wait until that happens. You want to really, again, keep that communication window open, You want to meet regularly, and I think that really is a key kind of takeaway. Set up joint working groups that are basically working together transparently to move everything forward, which I think is a key element. And then if and when friction does emerge, which it will, I'm sorry, but it always will, take that pause, take that kind of extra step and breath, and take another kind of step back and figure out what is happening, but also more importantly, what can be done to put the relationship back on the rails. You want to acknowledge that there might have been some expectations that kind of went off the rails. And so if that's the case, acknowledge it, move forward. Again, reset some timelines. You might have to do that typically, either if there's certain milestones that have to be hit in a certain time frame, you may have to reset that, and again, acknowledge that with the other side and try to come to an agreement on what those milestones and timelines need to be now going forward. And then really, if you're really having some major difficulty, you want to bring in somebody else, maybe from the outside, to come in as a facilitator, to have maybe that negotiation, that kind of communication put back on track, and definitely highly recommend that if that is a need.
And finally, Eric, do you have an instructive use case that you can share?
Got a couple of them. Again, I've been in a few companies where we've worked with the government side within the DoD, on the health side of DoD, Department of War, now the Department of Defense is DoD here in the United States. And when we were working with a product that was really focused on COVID, and as COVID waned, we were really trying to figure out, what could we do to continue our work with the DoD moving forward. And as Shereese mentioned on an earlier part of this talk, the part of the why, again, you might have the best product in the world, but you need to really figure out the why of, how can you benefit the public side of things, from an outcome standpoint. What are they looking for? What are they trying to solve from a use case standpoint? And so we went back to them and really had a heart-to-heart. We wanted to obviously still work with the DoD. We wanted to really have a continued relationship with them. So going forward, as COVID was waning, we said, what other areas could be of benefit to you in your team with regards to health? And from a soldier standpoint, if a soldier's out in the field, a lot of times there's issues with basically concussions and things of that nature, where if there's rifles going off or explosions going off, they want to make sure that there's some type of an element of treatment, but also more diagnostics for a soldier having a concussion. And so we talked to them about how that looked and what that meant. They wanted speed. They wanted something that would obviously diagnose something very quickly, be very inexpensive, easy to use, et cetera. So we went back to our drawing table and kind of figured out a way to do that. And so by doing that, giving more kind of questioning to them as to what they were looking for, how they wanted to kind of get an outcome to a potential solved type of therapeutic and or diagnostic, we were able to have a communication with them to really have a really good outcome, basically going to a diagnostic in a concussion world to ensure that their soldiers could be protected out in the field. And so it was a really good win-win going forward, which is awesome.
That sounds very useful. They had some new research, actually. A lot of soldiers get concussion injuries during training as well. So not even, they didn't even have to go into the field. Thank you, Eric.
Exactly.
I'm going to bring you back towards the end for your final word, and we're going to have a Q&A in a moment. And let's see. Ruban.
Yes, sir.
Welcome. I wonder if you could, so we've had this arc from the why in the beginning, how to build these partnerships, how to protect yourself and get things right when things have gone wrong. I wonder if you could take us in further into the future. What does a successful partnership look like in the long term? So we've going past building the relationship. We're past 6-12 months. What does it look like once the partnership's up and it's active and it's running? How to leverage it in the long term?
And how do you nurture those relationship? So the most important part it is, I understand, I'm reading a lot of comments and a lot of the part of it going around. Healthcare is tough because it is true. It, involves people, and, there are many layers of protection one side and concern other side. Because if you look at it scientific way, I think earlier Erkeda talked about is there are peer reviews, there are so many activities to make sure this is safe for human consumption and all of those part of it. It is all true, but on the other hand, what are the low-hanging fruits which can lead us to do successful thing is cost and access to the healthcare. Those two are the biggest challenge, in my opinion. Beyond, I mean, there are so much research, R&D going on pharmaceutical and medication and all that, that I will give it to the clinicians and people. But on the other side of it, you had to look at it as a technologies coming from, again, to introduce myself, I am in a Silicon Valley veteran, been here for 30 some years, built multiple companies in enterprise market, and I just live in Silicon Valley, so I have seen so many of them, and I have invested in more than 80 of them, and I've seen some of them succeed, many of them fail. So I have the scar to talk about the process part, where after all the discussion where Eric carried it, the next phase for a successful enterprise is scaling. Scaling mean you can get enough patients, enough providers, and then get them to pay you, because that is the toughest part of it. So where do you find the money? So to give some example of that from SenzMate's point of view, and some of the activities we have done is, for example, during the COVID time, there has been a lot of challenge of sending these vaccines or the medication to rural area and different thing. We are talking about, I mean, even US, and there are so many big tech companies done. But if you go to third world countries like Sri Lanka or various aspects, they had challenge. So that is where the technology was able to jump in and able to protect, doing a cold chain, which is supporting how these vaccines are being transported using the IoT devices to monitor the temperature and make sure the medicine is delivered, some of them. So the reason I brought up that point is, you found a niche and you found a problem which no one could else solve at that point, and you jump in. Now you start building the relationship. So as part of that, SenzMate started building pseudo EMR, electronic medical record system, to connect and cover this one. And that one, we worked on it, added, looking at the data. I think people talk about how do you go and articulate the value to these people. How do you do that is, you look at this data you gather across the nation, across the people, like a race and a gender or various aspects of it, and provide the value. Because I earlier talked about, one of them is access to the care, other one is cost of the care. So that is where, when you go and say there are this much mortality or this much expenses, you are looking at it by prevention care, or by preemptively attacking this one, you would be able to reduce the cost and show some data to drive those kind of decision, and say you may be spending $2 million on this part of it. By preventing and do that, eventually, at the steady state, you may have to only spend $500,000 or 1 million. So you are saving that part of it. So can you take that and invest into our technology? So some of the way we have done at SenzMate is we work with WHO, World Health Organization, and able to, find some funding. And so, by getting that funding, it's $100,000, $200,000. And so you are not doing free job. So you are getting something paid. And now you go and prove that you build that one into a platform. Now you go back with validated data, validated like support from this organization, and go to different nations and able to help that one. So by doing all of these, financially, again, I look from a business point of view, because most of the time, most of these ideas die when can you scale, can you make money, and can you make money to raise more money? Because I was listening to Amal, writing about his frustration on the part of it. It is a long game. It takes so much money and so much part of it. Absolutely, you are completely correct on that. But how do you get over some of those, issues? Is partnering in US or in the Western countries. You have these, agencies like national NHS, or in UK, those people. Then, but you had to be able to show the value which you are able to bring in to a particular area. So by doing those kind of support and conversation upfront, and looking from a business point of view, working backward. Okay, so then this is where I'm going to use some of the terminologies: TAM, SAM, SOM, in the total available market, and then able to address what is your addressable market, and then what are your targeted market. These are terminologies startups use, but I think it is important for healthcare organization to think about it and go and utilize that one. And one additional last thing to say is the device part of it. We work with a company called Yogo Health in US. We had Siva, founder of the company, a year ago, and they have been able to go to US Congress and got that device approved. Now they are into Mayo Clinic, they are into Harvard, they are into many of those. I mean, they had this similar frustration 2 years ago. So don't give up, guys. I mean, it is doable, but it is, you had to be intentional. You had to be, make sure there is a business case behind this, and then you can go. You're mute, Jose.
And now
it
we're
looks
at
like
the
there are a
group
few
hub.
questions. Yeah, sorry.
And I know Shereese and Eric, you had your hand up.
I think Eric was first.
Oh, I'll go first. That's fine. Thank you. Yeah, I think, again, Ruben, definitely on par with what is definitely needed, I guess from my background and just to help, I guess, others. Number one, from the AI side, use AI, use chat or open AI to basically do some queries. You can definitely, within the either digital health or medical device or even pharma, you can kind of play around with the AI side of it to find out where there is potential, I would say, connections in potential funding, both at the government level, foundation level, et cetera. So both that could be international, national. So just, definitely take advantage of that kind of side of it. From my background, there's a lot of connections that I've made at the state level here in the United States, at the national level, and then also at the global level. For you all here in the United States, there's the CDC and NIH. Everybody's familiar with that. But did you know there's actually an NIH foundation? There's a CDC foundation. Those groups actually work with the NIH and CDC, but they also help fund a lot of initiatives around some of the things that the CDC and NIH are doing. So definitely take a look at that. On the global scale, there's a group that is over, and I mentioned earlier to Jose, in Geneva, Switzerland, called FindDX. So if you're in the medical device field, look them up. But they are a global organization that looks at, I would say, low-cost diagnostics and digital health from a global perspective in underserved areas of the world. And so it's a good group to work with if you've got a diagnostic or digital platform that can be used globally. So definitely take a look at them, because again, they are great funding mechanisms. And then just last but not least, there is a lot of government initiatives out there, both here in the United States, but also globally. Do take a look at that. There are some great opportunities that you can look into, find, and then obviously access to get funds that are from a startup environment, non-dilutive funding, which is awesome. So I wanted to pass that on.
Shereese.
Yeah, there's a young lady or a woman, I'm assuming, Anna, in the comments who seems to be crashing out a little bit. I don't think we're answering her questions. I wanted to make sure we hit on. She was saying that public partnerships are not good for startups. They don't work. And I wanted to make sure she understood that is 100% a fair frustration. A lot of startups hit that same wall when they approach public hospitals. However, I always say it's because you're using the wrong math. There is a startup math and there's a private sector and public math that we use. So you're measuring it from one standpoint. And one of the things startups do not do is answer that question ahead of time. Who's going to pay for this? So that's a question you need to have with yourselves internally before you approach these public partnerships. But in the public sector, the math is different. We're not measuring in terms of cash. We're measuring in terms of how our ROI is, are our admissions, readmissions down? You want to help reduce those readmissions. You want to improve their reporting to CMS and boost workforce efficiency. So if you're getting those done, that public partnership you're trying to get will work for you. And one of the examples I would give was like the Prime Health Challenge out in Colorado in the United States. That is an amazing challenge. It pays for the pilot, and you are actually creating a public partnership that can prove your concept. So I would say that it's not a good idea to say that they don't work. I would say look at it from a different angle. What is your approach to working with these public organizations? And should you be going in with a different, like I said, math? So if you're looking at their money and they're not looking at that, you want to look at, is it going to reduce physician burnout? That's a huge one right now. Is it going to reduce readmissions? If you're solving for that problem, that's the thing you need to be honing in on when you talk to some of these people, not in, how much money we're all going to make, because most of them aren't in it to make a lot of money. They can't. That's the bottom line of that. You're trying to make money, but you'll never get there if that's your selling point. So I would just add that for Anna. So if anybody else has any advice for her.
I just want to piggyback and say I absolutely agree with you. Like, public healthcare is going to lose money. Like, they're not making money. Like, you are partnering with them to be compensated for your work, but the things that they're looking for are those quality metrics and how we're improving patient outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully, like you mentioned earlier, the why should be to improve patient outcomes. And how are you doing that? And that will bring the partnership, collaboration, and compensation.
Absolutely. And if I could just add as well, and I love what you said here, Shereese, basically, you've got to work out who the buyer is. If you're trying to sell to the CIO, that may not be the right buyer. It might be the chief operating officer. It might be, the oncology lead. It might be somebody else. But it's got to be the person that can realize that benefit with your tech. So you've got to make sure they're a stakeholder and they're part of who you are selling to, because you might have to rearrange staffing rosters. You might have to change how the service is provided, and it needs that person to do the human work in the organization to leverage your tech's benefit. So make sure you've got the right buyer in the room.
All right, we're going to be
that's
saying wrapping up the webinar soon. I wonder, Eric, the event isn't ending. We're going to the after party. So we're saying goodbye to YouTube because the after party isn't in the replay. Eric, I wonder if you can give us your final word.
Yeah, really appreciate it, Jose. Great talk and great having everybody on the panel. Yeah, I think the biggest thing, again, to have stress on the partnership side of it is really building that relationship for the long haul, the long game. Startups that thrive in the public-private environment understand that these are ecosystem plays. They're not quick wins. We've talked about that, but again, just really want to overestimate and overstate that. They document lessons learned. They stay mission focused, and they lead with integrity, even under pressure. Again, if you're thinking things are going off the rails, start talking. make sure they don't go off the rails. Governments remember partners who collaborate through challenges, not just those who celebrate during early successes, which is a key element.
You're mute.
Rachel, can you give us your final word?
Yeah, there was a piece of advice I was given a few years ago, which is fall in love with the problems. If you're in a startup, you've got to get deeply vested in the problems you're trying to solve. And really, this has to be mission-based for you. So get really curious. There was also another really interesting thing for me. Shereese said something that triggered for me. There was one guy that could sell me anything from a startup. And I said to him, how do you do this? And he said, it's called solution-based selling. Okay, now solution-based selling, yes, there's all the tailoring bit, which you may want to do some of, but it's the bit about actually working out what my problems are and how you're going to help solve them in partnership. And actually, I went and bought the book and read it, and that is a really good book, I think, for startups to read.
And mute again, Jose.
I did it again. I'm saying goodbye to Eric and Rachel here. Thank you so much for coming. Now,
Thank you, Jose.
and now we're going to the after party.